The sentence that detonated across the royal world was only 5 words long. Harry is not a joyful man. But it didn't come from King Charles, not William, not a bitter former palace employee hiding behind the word source. It came from Charlotte Griffiths, a journalist who says she knew Harry before Meghan, before California, before before the courtroom battles swallowed his life. Then she said something even more damaging. The Harry she remembered appeared to have vanished. But when the old messages between them surfaced, everyone assumed Meghan's problem would be jealousy. They were wrong. Because the reporter's real accusation was far more dangerous than an old flirtation. Nobody from the Sussex camp has publicly confirmed that Meghan was furious. No verified statement, no dramatic confrontation, no evidence of plates smashing inside the Montecito mansion. But that silence doesn't make this story disappear. It makes one question impossible to ignore. What did Charlotte Griffiths reveal that could threaten not merely Harry's marriage, but the entire story Harry and Meghan have spent years telling the world? The answer begins with a courtroom defeat. On July 7th, Britain's High Court dismissed the claims brought by Harry and 6 other prominent figures against Associated Newspapers, the publisher of the Daily Mail, and Mail on Sunday. Harry had accused the company of unlawful information gathering. The publisher denied wrongdoing. After months of hearings, the court's order was brutally simple. The claims are dismissed. 6 words. Years of anger, millions potentially hanging in the balance, gone in one line. But the strangest part wasn't that Harry lost. It was what came crawling out of the case before the judge delivered that blow. Private Facebook messages, old ones. December 2011 into January 2012. Long before Harry met Meghan. Long before anyone had heard the word Megxit. The messages were exchanged between Harry and Charlotte Griffiths after they met through mutual friends. They were playful, personal, flirtatious enough to create explosive headlines. Harry allegedly called her sugar. He mentioned missing their movie snuggles. She referred to him as Mr. Mischief and wrote about a fun weekend of naughtiness. That sounds intimate, almost too intimate. But then Griffiths did something nobody expected. She denied that they had been secret lovers. The movie snuggles, she said, involved sharing a blanket during a film with other people in the room. The naughtiness referred to drinking. Even the mysterious reference to a woman's shoe, which generated another round of suggestive headlines, supposedly had an ordinary explanation involving borrowed footwear and a cigarette break. So the reporter, who could have made the story more scandalous, did the opposite. She cleared Harry of the affair people were already imagining, but in the same breath, she opened a much darker door. Because Harry's problem wasn't what the messages suggested romantically, it was what they suggested about his memory. During the case, Harry said he hadn't known Griffiths was a journalist when they met. He maintained that he cut off contact after discovering her profession. During cross-examination, he said he had no idea whether he had exchanged Facebook messages with her. Griffith's account was different. She said they had met more than once. She said they remained in contact for several weeks. Then the messages appeared. Not gossip overheard at a party. Not the recollection of an anonymous source. Messages. Written words sitting there like tiny time capsules, waiting 15 years to explode. And suddenly, a case about how newspapers obtained information became a question about whether information had sometimes come from people already moving around Harry's social world. But Griffiths wasn't finished. She described the first weekend they met. A country house in Hampshire, drinks flowing, friends gathered together, a younger Prince Harry, still known as the unpredictable royal bachelor. Then, according to Griffiths, Harry placed a small white tablet on her tongue and told her that now he knew he could trust her. She believed it was probably nothing more sinister than paracetamol. But think about that image. A prince performing a bizarre loyalty test on a woman he has just met. A woman who would later become a senior journalist. A woman whose private messages with him would one day surface inside the very court battle he launched against the press. You couldn't write a cleaner trap. But who was trapped? The reporter? Harry? Or the version of the past both of them thought would remain private forever? Harry's legal war was never merely about money. He made it personal. He told the court that press intrusion had poisoned relationships, created suspicion among friends, and made Meghan's life an absolute misery. He described a world where private information appeared in newspapers, leaving him wondering who had betrayed him and how reporters had obtained it. That pain is real to him. You could hear it in the language. But the court required evidence tied to specific articles and specific alleged acts. Suspicion wasn't enough. That was the wall Harry hit. And Charlotte Griffiths was standing on the other side of it, with messages suggesting that at least some information around him might have traveled through ordinary human contact. Friends, parties, conversations, people who knew people. Nothing as cinematic as a hacked telephone, but sometimes far more difficult to control. Now put yourself in Meghan's position, not the cartoon version of Meghan, created by angry headlines, the strategist. The former actress who understands framing, timing, and public perception. The woman who has spent years watching a single sentence become a worldwide narrative before breakfast. Would she really be furious because Harry sent flirtatious messages before they had even met? Possibly not. The dates destroy that scandal before it begins. But would she be alarmed that a reporter had produced a competing account of Harry's past at the exact moment his credibility was under maximum pressure? That's different. Because the reporter wasn't saying, Harry once liked me. She was effectively saying, Harry's version isn't the only version. Wait, it gets worse. The old messages weren't the reporter's most dangerous claim. That came next, and it dragged Meghan directly into the battlefield. Subscribe now, because the court has already dismissed the claims, but the consequences hearing concerning costs and possible appeal steps was scheduled for July 29 and 30. In other words, Harry may have lost the central battle, but the final price of that defeat hasn't yet been written. And before that next courtroom door opens, Charlotte Griffiths has thrown another accusation into the corridor. Remember the supposedly secret meeting between representatives for Harry, Meghan, and King Charles? The quiet attempt to reopen communication. Aides meeting at the Royal Overseas League near Clarence House. No grand family embrace. No Harry walking through palace gates. Just communications people testing whether the frozen relationship between father and son could begin to thaw. Then photographs of the meeting appeared in the press. Immediately, suspicion returned. Who knew? Who called the photographer? Who benefited from turning a private peace effort into a global headline? Harry and Meghan's side denied that the Duke or Duchess had leaked the meeting. But Griffiths later alleged that information had reached her from within the Sussex communications operation. That is her claim. It has not been established as fact, but its impact is obvious. Because if the accusation sticks in the public mind, Harry's war with the press suddenly looks like something more complicated than victim against villain. Think about the contradiction. Harry says leaks destroyed trust inside his family. But a reporter now alleges that people working on his side provided information about a supposedly private reconciliation effort. The Sussexes deny that Harry or Meghan leaked it. But notice the wording of the battlefield. Harry, Meghan, their communications team, the palace, the photographer, the reporter. Everybody is pointing at someone else. Nobody is holding the camera. That's the moment Meghan's alleged fury starts to make sense, but not for the cheap reason the headlines want you to believe. This isn't about an old blanket. It's about control. Meghan and Harry left the royal system partly because they believed they could control their own story outside palace walls. But now the same cycle appears to follow them everywhere. A private meeting, a photograph, a denial, a counterclaim. Then another reporter telling the world what supposedly happened behind the scenes. California changed the location. It didn't stop the leaks. And that raises the question Harry may fear most. What if the palace was never the only problem? Griffith's description of Harry as no longer joyful cut because she claimed to remember another version of him. A younger Harry who could be reckless, affectionate, ridiculous, and irritating within the same hour. The prince who sent jokes and kisses. The prince who trusted too quickly, then distrusted completely. The prince who could disappear beneath a blanket during a film without imagining that every word around that afternoon might one day be examined by lawyers. But the Harry she sees now, she suggested, is different, burdened, angry, locked inside a permanent argument with institutions powerful enough to keep that argument alive forever. And here's the cruel twist. The more Harry fights to prove that the press has distorted him, the more of his private life enters the public record. Old girlfriends, old friendships, old messages, old parties, old suspicions. Each lawsuit begins with Harry demanding privacy. Each courtroom battle ends with the world knowing something it didn't know before. How do you defeat that machine when pulling the lever only feeds it? That may be what makes this moment so dangerous for Meghan. She can attack a hostile commentator. She can ignore an unnamed palace source. She can dismiss a tabloid headline. But Griffiths occupied several worlds at once. She was a journalist, but she also moved among people Harry knew. She had personal messages, but she insisted the supposedly romantic details were innocent. She criticized Harry, but she also complained that the reaction against her had become sickening. That mixture is difficult to dismiss cleanly. Too friendly to portray as a total stranger. Too critical to portray as an ally. Too specific to wave away as vague gossip. And once again, Harry is facing the one thing no media strategy can fully erase. A witness with receipts. But wait, did those receipts actually prove Harry lied? Not automatically. Human memory fails. 15 years pass. One person remembers several meetings. Another remembers one. A message sounds intimate to outsiders, but ordinary to the people who wrote it. That uncertainty matters. Yet uncertainty doesn't rescue a public figure. It feeds the argument. It gives every side enough material to build its preferred Harry. Victim. Hypocrite. Traumatized son. Reckless prince. Devoted husband. Man consumed by a battle he can no longer leave. The facts don't create one Harry. They create 7. And Meghan has to live beside whichever version the public chooses that morning. Now, the jealousy story looks almost childish. There was no secret romance, according to Griffiths. The exchanges occurred years before Meghan entered Harry's life. That should have ended the scandal. Instead, it transformed it. Because removing the romance leaves only the credibility problem. Why did Harry appear uncertain about the messages? Why did Griffiths believe his courtroom account minimized their contact? Why did this friendship matter so much to a case about unlawful information gathering? Why did an attempt to prove that journalists could not have obtained details lawfully end with a journalist producing evidence of personal access? That's the genuine, wait, what? Moment. Harry walked into court to expose how the press reached inside his life. The press walked out discussing how easily one of its future editors had once entered his social circle. But there is one more image, perhaps the most revealing one. Picture Meghan in Montecito, looking at 2 pieces of information placed side by side. On one side, old messages from a carefree prince, signing off with kisses and joking about shared memories. On the other, a high court order stamped July 7, 2026. The claims are dismissed. Between those 2 documents lies Harry's entire transformation. From a man terrified that people around him might be talking to the press, to a man whose battle with the press has become the loudest story around him. From a prince trying to identify who betrayed his confidence, to a husband whose former acquaintance is publicly questioning whether his own account can be trusted. From royal mischief to legal consequences. And that is why the reporter's words hurt more than any romantic rumor ever could. She didn't claim Meghan had stolen Harry. She implied that somewhere inside the endless war, Harry had lost the version of himself who knew how to be happy. Now tell me this in the comments. Was Charlotte Griffiths exposing a contradiction the public deserved to see? Or did Harry's fight for privacy end exactly where he always feared it would, with another stranger holding his memories up to the light? Because on July 29th, or the court may begin calculating the cost of his defeat. But the price already visible is the saddest one. A reporter remembers Prince Harry laughing beneath a shared blanket. The world now remembers him standing outside a courtroom. And between those two images,